And at day 7, we have Nightwalker, the Midnight Detective. And this is a horror mystery anime that happens to be based after a video game. And just to let you all know, this is the only video game based anime that I'm going to be taking a look at in this feature. And in case you're wondering about the game, it was a visual novel that was only released on the PC-98 and only in Japan, and as far as I know, there was no fan translation as of yet. And knowing that, I've obviously never played it, and I don't think anyone else has ever played it if you can't read Japanese. And I'm pretty sure, for those of you that have seen this series back when it first aired, you probably were unaware that it was even based after a game at all. So yeah, obviously knowing all this, I have to take a look at it for what it is without comparing it to its original source material. So with that said, let's talk about the story. So it takes place in the modern times, where it stars the main character, Shido, who happens to be a vampire. But he wasn't always a vampire though, he was actually a human before who got turned into a vampire and now has to live on forever. So what he does is that he works as a private investigator and he wants to solve crime involving a group of creatures called the Nightbreed. And what the Nightbreed does is that they possess into human bodies and they turn them into monsters and just wreak havoc all over the place. Now, doesn't this sound very familiar at all for another anime that I did a review on? Yeah, it's a lot like Vampire Princess Miyu, but just instead of fighting Shinmas, he's fighting the Nightbreed. So yeah, it's pretty similar, but of course this one does have a lot of differences though, you do get a lot of different side characters here. So you have Yayoi, who happens to have a very police family background, and she has been good friends with Shido for quite a little while. And she ends up offering some of her blood to him so that he can stay alive. But despite how close they are, they usually seem to get into some really big dumb arguments, which are pretty amusing. And then you have Rio, who happens to be a high schooler who had her parents killed by a bunch of Nightbreeds, but Shido happened to save her. And ever since then, Rio has always looked up to Shido, and in one situation later on, he eventually turns her into a vampire. And finally, you have Gumi, who happens to be a flying spirit who helps out the group, but also does pester them a lot of the times. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say about the story here, is that it's just about these main characters that are solving crime while trying to protect the humans from the Nightbreed. And there are many various situations. And we'll start talking more about it later, but for now, let's start moving on and start talking about the show's animation. And the animation here is actually pretty good, so not only does everything look really nice with the art direction and such, but also the fight scenes are really cool, the animation flow in general is really good. And as you would expect, there is quite a lot of blood here, but nothing over the top, but it does look good. And I have to mention that Shido's weapon is that he actually makes himself bleed from his finger and the blood ends up turning into a sword. In a strange way, it kinda reminds of Kill la Kill, but obviously this came out first. But still, it's a pretty cool weapon idea. But overall, I really can't think of much complaints for the animation. I think everything looks really good for what it is. And as for the show's music, the music is pretty awesome. So not only do you have a good mix of jazz and rock, and it sounds great, but there's actually one song in particular that I do remember hearing that does kind of sound very similar to Starless from King Crimson, and that is pretty great. And the atmospheric stuff is good too, and as for the opening and ending themes, I really enjoy them a lot. In fact, I'd say that the opening theme is very, very fitting. So yeah, the music is really great and does fit really well with the show. So now, as for the show's voice acting, if you're going to be watching this one in English, I can safely say that it is actually quite good. So the main character, Shido, is being played by Richard Consino, and I think that's pretty great, and I think he does fit this role really well. And since because Richard Consino plays Kenshin from Rurouni Kenshin, there's a few lines that do kind of remind me of him, which is kind of amusing. But in general, I do think that it is a good fit. And as for Yayoi, she happens to be played by Mary Devon, and she's not too bad. At first, it was a little inconsistent, but I feel like as it went further, it did get better. And as for Rio, she is being played by Dorothy Fawn, and she does a really good job here, really can't complain much. And then Gumi is being played by Sandy Fox, who does do a pretty good job, and as you would expect, Sandy Fox is usually the type of voice actor that tends to play a lot of annoying as shit characters, but I mean, I can't complain here because it actually does fit the character. And as for the final one that I'll go into is the character Kane, who, by the way, looks a lot like Alucard from Castlevania, while he's being voiced by Lex Lang. And I think that this was one of his better earlier roles. But as for some of the extras, you have Bridget Hoffman, Bob Preppenbrook, Leah Sargent, Terrence Stone, Melissa Fawn, and even Wendy Lee, and a bunch of others. But yeah, overall, I do think that the voice acting here is actually quite good, and is definitely a good surprise. So personally, I'd say whether you're watching this one in English or Japanese, you really can't go too much wrong. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Nightwalker, the Midnight Detective, is that I actually really liked this one. I thought it was pretty enjoyable. So I thought the characters were not only pretty interesting and had some good backstories, but also they were a lot of fun. They had some really good chemistry together. And yeah, there is quite a few funny parts within this one, but it doesn't feel corny and out of place. It actually fits well with the characters. And it really does add more to the basic concept being a lot more interesting and fun. Now, I am pretty sure that the game probably has a lot more in-depthness with the characters, but the thing is though, I feel like they did do a pretty good job here of what they had to work with. But I can't say for certain though, because like I said, I can't play visual novels that are only in kanji. But I can say, out of all 12 episodes, it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot missing, except for the ending. I have to admit, as much as I did really enjoy this one, the ending was not the best. I'm not going to go too much into detail about it, but what I will say is that the final episode actually starts out really interesting and actually does get really good, but then after that point, it ends up being like rushed in a cheaply manner. And that's mostly because the way how it ends is that it ends in like a sort of cliffhanger where it makes you think that there's going to be more episodes, but obviously they never got made. So it really makes you wish that there was more episodes here, but unfortunately we never got them. But despite this one issue though, I really did enjoy this one quite a lot, and I would recommend it for that it is a pretty good fun vampire story. And there's only 12 episodes, so it's really not long at all, but like I said though, the ending does make me wish that there was a little bit more. And I feel that this is one of the better animes based after a video game for that it is pretty entertaining, and as its own, I really do think that it does stand out well. So Nightwalker, even though it's based after a game that I never played, and unfortunately, I have a feeling that we probably won't get a fan translation of it since it seems like that PC98 games don't really get fan translated that often. But what I can say is that it was actually a good surprise.